How's it going, guys? What's up? Gleb here, and today I wanted to share with you my thoughts on the Panasonic GH5 after using it for 1 year. So this is the Panasonic GH5 year in review. Let's roll the intro. So the GH5 came out just over a year ago, and it's been getting great reviews across the board from pretty much any camera review website or YouTuber and person out there. And overall, it's been praised for its amazing set of video features, its amazing video quality, its great image stabilization, just great battery life, overall very ergonomic body, and yeah, mainly it's just all around workhorse camera. So that's one of the reasons why I picked mine up, to use it for commercial projects or vlogs and YouTube stuff, personal stuff, things like this. And overall, I think it's been a great camera, and after using it for a year, I feel like I can share even more thoughts about what I like and what I don't like about this camera. So first, let's begin with kind of the elephant in the room. And with this camera, one of the biggest kind of negatives that you often hear about is the autofocus. And unfortunately, even though Panasonic has released a couple of firmware updates that are supposed to address the issue, it has gotten better, but it's still not as good as a lot of other manufacturers that have video autofocus. It's usable to a certain degree, but it does tend to hunt a lot and does tend to lose focus and has to kind of bounce back and regain it. And because it's using just a contrast detect system, it's kind of got this pulsing feeling going on around the clips, which can get really distracting, not only when you're filming them, but especially when you're watching them if you're looking for that out of focus area. So I mean, out of everything that this camera has to offer, this is the only thing that's keeping it from being this absolute perfect all-around video camera, basically film camera. So with the autofocus, over a year of use, I've kind of gotten used to it. I kind of gotten used to how to make it work for me. However, it still gets frustrating sometimes when it decides to drift away from your face or from your subject and just kind of do its own thing before bouncing back. Or sometimes it doesn't even bounce back, you just have to kind of click the shutter button halfway or tap on the screen for it to actually find the focus again. And usually you kind of get this jarring, hunting look to it. So, you can really see it focus instead of the smooth transition that you get from Canon's dual pixel autofocus system or the Sony system, which gives you this nice smooth transition. So, with that out of the way, with the autofocus out of the way, like I said, I found a way to kind of use it for me, but I only use it on personal projects. If I was doing paid work, I'd probably just stick to manual focus, just because I don't want to leave it to chance for a shot to be out of focus when I need it to be really tack sharp. So commercial projects, definitely manual focus. Stuff for YouTube, vlogs, and things like that, autofocus I think is fine. It's, not as formal, very loose, so yeah, I think it works fine for that. So anyways, with that out of the way, let's talk about the great things that this camera has to offer. So the Panasonic, what I really love about it is just the amount of feature it gives you for its $2,000 price tag. There's a lot of stuff packed in there. You get 4K video up to 60 frames per second. You even get the true cinema 4K, the 17:9, so it's a little bit wider. You even get that up to 30 frames per second. And then further on, obviously the standard Full HD and 720p that no one else uses anymore. But overall, this is an amazing set of features. And through firmware updates, Panasonic even went ahead and added even more video features to this camera, which is amazing. Some of the features included, you got the hybrid log gamma for your HDR shooting, and also your anamorphic features in this. So if you're using anamorphic lenses, if you want that look, it has the feature in the camera to shoot it at that aspect ratio, so you can later squeeze it down in post. So it's amazing that they've added all these features even after the camera was released, instead of just waiting for the next model to come out. So I think it's awesome that they did that. It adds even more value to the camera after the fact that you bought it. And then in addition to its video features, the camera also obviously shoots stills. It is a 20 megapixel sensor. It is a micro four thirds sensor, so it's not going to give you quite that same look as a full frame camera would, or even an APS-C size sensor. But I've actually been really surprised with the stills quality on this camera. At first I was a little bit more reluctant to use it for stills, mainly just sticking to using my Nikon. However, over time I kind of warmed up to it and found that this is a great walking around camera. It's a lot lighter and a lot smaller than my Nikon. It's great to take on small and quick trips and just have it hanging in your hand or just around the strap without weighing you down too much, and it takes excellent stills provided you're in pretty decent light. Even on low light it still does okay, but not quite as good as you would get from a full frame camera. But the stills still come out pretty sharp, and you know, the colors on them are very punchy. I've been loving the colors that are coming out of this camera, especially on the standard profile. And the same goes for video. The 4K video, the full HD video, all of that, it's tack sharp and the colors are punchy. Or if you don't want the camera to decide the colors for you, you can always set it to Cinelog D or Cinelog V, so it gives you a little bit more dynamic range and room to color correct later in post. And you can get a log profile for this camera by buying it through Panasonic for $100. It's their V-Log Lite, and it's supposed to make the dynamic range even greater. However, I've never really had a use for it, so I never bothered buying it because I've been finding the results that I get out of the camera to be okay for what I want to see. And yeah, so I just never really went around to buying it, and I don't really think it's the most necessary thing unless you really want the maximum control for color grading and color correction. For both stills and video, this camera does have its awesome image stabilization, which I absolutely love. When you're vlogging or shooting video, it's really nice to be able to have that feature, so it kind of helps you smooth out the shots a little bit. Sometimes if you jerk your camera a little bit too much, you can kind of see the system working. However, you know, it's smooth enough that I think for most situations that it's really hard to notice, and it's pretty easy to turn off if you don't need to use it. In addition to that, if you're mounting one of Panasonic's stabilized lenses onto the camera, the two systems kind of work in tandem and make the footage even smoother, which it's really nice. It's not obviously not going to be as good as using a full-on gimbal. However, it is much nicer than not having image stabilization at all. So really good on that. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about video is that this camera does support up to 180 frames per second of slow motion. And while at 180 frames, the image does start to look a little bit softer. If you drop it down to 120, it looks pretty sharp, at least to me. It's not quite as sharp as you would get from, you know, some cameras, but it's still very usable, and you know, it just looks good. It looks very smooth, and it's nice for those really dramatic shots if you're into that by making it slow motion. The only downside to using the slow motion in this camera is that you lose your sound and you lose your autofocus. The autofocus you can kind of live with because, like I said, it's not the most reliable thing in general. However, losing the sound, you know, it's okay, but if you're slowing it down, the sound's gonna slow it down anyways. However, you know, it'd be kind of nice if it just kept everything consistent. Also, you kind of have to dig through the menus to get to the high frame rate shooting. However, you know, you can easily add it to the My Menu setting, which is a great way to access commonly used features, or you can set it to one of the many custom buttons on the top. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about the ergonomics and the look and feel of the camera. So this camera, I think, you know, it looks pretty standard. It's not going to be as pretty as some like the Olympus cameras or the Fujis where they have that retro design. It's pretty utilitarian looking, but I'm okay with that. And you kind of notice it's a little bit larger for a mirrorless camera compared to some of the other models that are available. And you know, some people might find the downside in that. However, I found it to be really great because I kind of have bigger hands, and this grip is perfect, so I can, you know, really get a firm grip on this camera and won't be afraid of it like falling out of my hand or anything like that. And I just feel like it gives a lot more control. You also got plenty of buttons up on the top, so you can quickly access all the major features and settings that you use. You can set the back dial to change a different setting. For example, I have it set to ISO. I can change all 3 exposure settings without having to dig through menus or press any additional buttons, which is amazing. And I feel like all cameras should have a 3rd dial at this point instead of just the 2 up on the top, or just in Canon's case, 1 up in the top and then the little wheel on the back. And what's really awesome is that each of these custom buttons on this camera, you can actually change what they do. So if you don't like white balance being up here, you can change that button to something else and have it do a completely different thing that it's not supposed to. Obviously, you kind of have to remember what you set it at because it's still labeled as white balance, but I think it's really awesome that you can customize this camera and change the buttons around to really make it yours and make it comfortable for you to use. And in addition to the buttons, it also has a very, very useful touchscreen on the back. The touchscreen is nice, it's quick, it's responsive, it's really easy to use, and makes it really easy to navigate through the menus. You also get a little joystick on the back so you can quickly select your autofocus point or navigate through menus. I kind of found myself jumping between the joystick and the touchscreen sometimes just because I find the joystick to be such a big convenience and so easy to use that it's just kind of there, you know. My thumb just kind of reaches into it. Let me see if I can, bam, right there, boom, that little guy. My thumb just kind of reaches to it and makes it really easy to get around the camera. And then moving on with the usability and just overall feel of the camera, it's got a great battery life. So the batteries that are in it, they're huge, they're massive, and they last for a very long time. I can take this out and pretty much shoot with it for a good portion of the day and not even deplete the battery all the way, which is great because you don't want to be lugging around bajillion batteries with you and constantly changing them out, especially when you need to be quick and you need to be shooting instead of worrying about that. So overall, I think the camera's design and just overall feel and body is great. So there's a lot of things to like about this camera, and there's very few things not to like. I already talked about one of them, and that was being the autofocus, and the rest are pretty much just small little things that I wish they could have changed or would have changed in the firmware update, but they haven't. One of them being is, you notice how I talked about the custom dial modes up on the top. So you have C1, C2, and C3. While those are nice to have, I wish that they would at least remember what your exposure settings were on those, like your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Because if you were to switch from C1, for example, which I use for slow motion, over to regular video shooting, and then back to C1, then I have to readjust all the exposure settings because it goes back to the default. And then the same goes between movie mode and stills mode. With movie mode and stills mode, it actually keeps the settings the same. And normally if I'm jumping from a video to a still, I change the exposure, I change the shutter speed, I change the aperture just because you can have a little bit more control. And then I go back to the video and they stay the same. I wish it did it kind of like my Nikon or some Canons that I've used before, where if you switch to video mode, it remembers the settings that you left it on that, and if you switch it back to stills, it goes back to the previous settings. I just think it makes the workflow a lot faster and a lot quicker, and it'd be nice if Panasonic kind of added that feature into the camera as well. But I kind of got used to it. You make do with what you have, and overall it's a small little quirk, but just wish it was fixed, but you can live without it. And the next thing just has to do with the viewfinder, which I mentioned the problem in my initial review of this camera, which you can find in the link up here. And that's the viewfinder doesn't really have an image preview unless you turn it on. However, then that's where it basically shows you what your exposure is going to be without taking the picture. And you can turn that feature on. My biggest problem with it is that it also simulates the shutter speed. And if you set your shutter speed to a pretty slow one, then the whole viewfinder starts to be really blurry and really hard to see through. It just doesn't stay at that high frame rate that you're kind of used to. So everything starts to look very blurry and it starts to lag a little bit. And that's like the only camera that I noticed that does that. I'm using my dad's Olympus to shoot this video, and the viewfinder on that, if it's too dark, then it just shows you a very dark image. It doesn't try to lighten it up artificially, or it doesn't simulate the shutter speed, which I think just makes it that much better and quicker to use. I don't know why Panasonic went that route, but it's just one of those little things that has been bugging me on this camera ever since I got it. But also another very little thing, like I said, not too many negatives on this camera other than the big autofocus issue. Beyond that, the camera is packed with amazing features. It's great for both stills and video, for personal and commercial work, and overall it's just a great all-around camera for everyday use and professional use. And yeah, it gets the job done. It does it really well, and if you can work with some of the quirks that this camera has, it can absolutely work for you. So that's my not so quick year-in review on the Panasonic GH5. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you can kind of see that this camera is, it's pretty good. It's a really good camera, and I absolutely love using it. I love taking it with me everywhere I go, and it kind of opens up a lot of different doors, a lot of different things you can do with it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found it helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to share this video with your friends that are also into photography or video. So yeah, that's it. I will see you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.